This is Sound, Noise Acoustics Engineering Podcast, episode number 8, brought to you by Sound Solutions, an independent acoustical consulting firm at ssacoustical.com. We provide you with knowledge and resources to address acoustical issues. I'm Bill Holliday, PE. Thank you for joining me on this episode. I'm going to talk about greater sage grouse, in general, wildlife noise projects. So Sound Solutions has been assisting in monitoring and evaluating noise radiating to greater sage grouse leks. That's the areas where they breed. Near a new mine in Nevada, and we've been doing that for 2 seasons. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about that project, and it applies to other wildlife noise projects. So the greater sage grouse males, they make noise. You can look this up on YouTube, but they make some noises as they try to attract a mate. And environmental noise from other sources, can interfere with that process, and it can influence or hurt this mating and partnership and reproduction of the greater sage grouse. And these greater sage grouse, their populations are diminishing. They're not endangered, but they are protected. And so we worked with the BLM, who had jurisdiction on this land and oversight of this project. And it was not, there's not a clear limit or clear guideline, but the BLM was responsible for protecting this population, and so they used the latest science. And in this case, the latest science came from University of California, Berkeley, biology professor Dr. Petroselli, and she has done many studies, mostly relating to gas pipelines near greater sage grouse breeding areas, those leks. And Dr. Petroselli states in her published studies that you should measure the existing, and they call it the L90 noise level. I'll discuss what that means, but the L90 noise level before an operation. And in this case, we're talking about a mine, but before whatever operation goes in place. And then afterwards, you measure the L50 once the operation's going, and it can't be more than 10 dB above that L90. And we're only concerned about this noise level during the breeding season. So that's March 1st to May 15th, and it's only during the morning hours when the birds are active, and that's 1 hour before sunrise, up to 3 hours after sunrise, just that 4-hour window during that, 10-week period. The statistical noise levels, those are the noise levels that are exceeded that percent of the time. So an L50 ends up being a median noise level. If you take the noise during an hour, you'll get all these little, let's say you take it for a second, little second samples for an hour. You get 3,600 samples. And if you sort those from highest to lowest, and you pick out the middle one, that'll be your L50. And if you pick out way at the low end that's exceeded 90% of the time, that'll be your L90. And the idea is an L90 is they call it an ambient noise level, but it's the noise level that's persistent. It's not an aircraft flying over briefly. It's the noise level that really exists for a long period of time during each hour. The L50 also is not taking into account short duration events. So actually, using these criteria, you could have bombs going off for 29 minutes of that hour, or jackhammers hammering 2 feet away from the lek, as long as for 31 minutes, or actually 30 minutes and a second, for 50% of the time, the noise levels are not above that established L90 ambient. So it's a little bit of a weird criteria, but that's what we're using. That's the latest science they've come up with. And I know that Dr. Petroselli has stated that, brief events could influence them. They're trying to come up with something that's reasonable, and so that's why they came up with these statistical noise levels. So a key point is this agreement. When you're going in to establish an agreement with the BLM or whatever agency, you're going to have to live with that could be for the life of the mine. So we got involved with this project, Sound Solutions got involved with this project after this agreement had already been established. But it would have been helpful if this wasn't exactly, if there was a little bit more leeway in this agreement. But the agreement that was made said that you have to measure for a week in 2013, the year 2013, before the mine's operating, just 1 week, and then for the rest of the life of the mine, unless you can show that there's not going to be any impacts going forward. I mean, if you have consistent seasons where there's no impacts, no exceedances, then you might be able to stop this. But for every season going forward, you have to measure for that entire breeding period for 4 hours a day during that peak breeding time of day. And what they came up with is if you can't identify the noise source of an exceedance, if you have an exceedance, if you can't identify it, we're blaming it on the mine. And if you have more than 7 hourly exceedances during any season, your operation could be shut down. If you could identify, or at least shut down during those 4 hours during the breeding season, which was not a good thing for productivity of the mine. So they definitely wanted to avoid that if they could. The 1 week that was measured in 2013 was not necessarily typical of the rest of the breeding season for years to come. We've had issues with insect noise, of course, bird noise, wind noise, other noise sources that weren't necessarily that prevalent during the relatively brief baseline noise levels. But they're stuck with the 2013, those pre-mine levels defined or established that criteria. And for every year going forward, it's based on that. So they're stuck with those levels that they have to meet. So there were, even during the pre-mine, before the mine even existed, during those 7 days, there were 4 of them when there were exceedances. Now there's no mining noise, and there's 4 exceedances, or 4 days where exceedances occurred. So we definitely were expecting there's going to be a lot of exceedances. Even if the mine made 0 noise, there's going to be a lot of times when that L50 is more than 10 dB above the L90. And that can just happen on a windy day. You just have a lot of wind noise, and it could be calm for a moment, and during that establishing the baseline, they had some days where it was quite windy and it was calm during other parts of that hour, so the L90 was quite low, but the L50, there was wind for at least 30 minutes, but not necessarily for 90% of that hour. So we were expecting quite a bit, and we found that. Every week there were multiple exceedances that needed to be explained. And ideally what we'd have is a person sitting out there for the whole breeding season, hire some college kid or someone to sit out there during the season to make notes and tell us, all right, if the noise level was high, it was from the farm that's nearby, or it was from a tractor, or it was from these ATV all-terrain vehicle, these little 4-wheel recreational vehicles that were zipping around, or from a cow. We heard cow noises, or horses. There's some wild horses out there, and birds chomping on or picking at the microphone. Lots of noise sources out there, and it would have been great to have someone identify them, but that was not going to be possible because the BLM said, hey, that will disturb the greater sage grouse breeding, having a person in the vicinity, so that wasn't an option. It would have also been nice just to have cameras in every direction, but the amount of data, that wasn't going to be a cost-effective approach. So what we tried to do is at each lek set up a weather station, because we knew this wind speed was going to be a big issue. also set up a sound level meter recording near the primary noise sources. And in our case, there was a mine that was a potential primary noise source, so we put a meter near there. There was a highway not too far away, set up a sound level meter there. There was a farming activity that a meter would have been a good idea there, but we didn't know that they had a lot of activity until the season was well underway. And so what we could do is say, all right, if it's coming from the mine, the sound level meter half-mile from the mine should be louder than the sound level at the lek, which is 3 miles away. So if we're saying it's from the mine, we should see a correlation between the noise levels from the mine and at the lek, and it should be louder at the mine. And so we could identify it that way. And if we could also correlate noise with wind speeds, and we found that the noise correlated best with the gust readings in the 1 minute level. So we had sound level meters that recorded hourly data, so we could quickly say, all right, what's the L50 and the L90? Actually, we don't care about the L90. What's the L50 for that hour? Is it an issue? If it's not an issue, we're done with that hour. It passed. It's lower than 10 dB above that original L90, and so we're in good shape. If it was an exceedance, then those sound level meters had the ability to look at the spectrum. And the spectrum means from low frequency, the low bass frequencies, up to the high frequencies. And we could correlate that spectrum with different noise sources or with the noises at different sound level meters. So we found that the birds made higher frequency noise, they're chirping, and the wind produces lower frequency as it blasted over the microphone. And so we were able to correlate the noise levels with the winds and with the birds and identify most of the noise sources. On several occasions, we did measure noise from heavy equipment, and we tried to correlate with the measurements at the other microphones to determine the direction of the noise. We also correlated that with, or asked the mine what was going on that day, what was their schedule of activities, and could we try to figure out what the source was, why it was different on this one day. And we did end up identifying a water truck that was operating, watering the roads when it shouldn't have been, and so we quickly could put an end to that before they had too many exceedances. And we also found out that there was farming activity with heavy equipment, earth-moving equipment at a farm that was located actually closer to the leks than the mine was. But my understanding is that a farm, while it's closer to the lek, or closer to this breeding grounds, didn't need to conduct a noise monitoring program. But we could discard those sources if they're not from the mine. Another problem we saw is when equipment failed, and that was an issue. We couldn't download the signals. We found it was most cost effective to use cell signals, connect the sound level meters and weather stations to cell downloading ability instead of having someone daily go out to the site, because it was pretty remote. And so that ended up being more cost effective, but we did have some situations when batteries died ahead of time, when we had very cold nights. We had snowy days, and equipment failed. We had birds knock over, wind those weather stations, and try to run away with a windscreen. So there were several issues where equipment didn't give us complete data at all of the locations. And again, the agreement was if we have lack of data, the mine gets blamed for the exceedance. So we tried to minimize failures, of course. One of the problems we saw that the population, it wasn't easy to determine our success. So at the end of the first season, we couldn't do a bird count and say, yeah, there were a bunch of pregnant birds and we had success. You need to compare it to a control group. You need to so that you can eliminate some of the other variables. You need to do this study over a number of years. The noise isn't necessarily, if it's a bit louder, boom, that's a bad issue. It's very gray, the impact. And so we weren't able to just come up with an easy solution as to, oh, they are meeting it. Well, I mean, we could say they're meeting the criteria, but we couldn't say the impact on the population of the sage grouse, how the noise was or wasn't influencing that population. It would have needed more extensive studies. Another frustration with the project was we did a lot of work. It cost a lot of money to do this monitoring every day and evaluating, correlating data. And I'm not sure how much it helped the sage grouse, the greater sage grouse population in the region. I think there were other motivations behind the stringent criteria. The mine actually hired a biologist to track what was happening with the sage grouse, and they found that ravens were the single largest contributor to reducing that greater sage grouse population at the Lex. The ravens were eating the baby sage grouse, and that was a big issue. The problem is ravens are protected. You can't just go out and hunt the ravens to help the sage grouse population. So, the biggest influence they couldn't address. Another oddity in my eyes was that you could buy hunting licenses and actually hunt greater sage grouse. So greater sage grouse are protected, but not protected enough to avoid being able to hunt them. So the mine, it might have been a better use of their money just to buy a whole bunch of hunting licenses and not use them. That might have increased the sage grouse population more than our noise study did. Because, I mean, we measured very few exceedances that were due to the non-wind or bird related that we had to address in detail, and just a couple that were mine related that we addressed. So I'm not sure how much of an impact we had, and that's the frustration we see with a lot of projects, these wildlife projects, that it's not, that the criteria, I don't know, sage grouse, other animals aren't the best at filling out surveys as to what's influencing them. So, we're doing the best we can, but it's a lot of money getting thrown at something that may or may not be that helpful. We had another project in Arizona where they had a noise criteria 500 feet from a generator, or 500 feet from any noise source. It couldn't be above 35 decibels. And, it's a big park, big area. This is Oregon National Monument. The deer that they were worried about, I don't know how much of an impact that is if the noise level was a little louder there, because the deer could have avoided, just gone further away if the noise was an issue. But the biologists are doing the best they can. We're trying to do the best we can. It's limited, with the knowledge we have. So I hope that most of it is for the good of the animal and there aren't other agendas involved. But you will find that from group to group, the BLM, it depends on the personality of the people and how those negotiations go, because the criteria can vary quite a bit. All right, that's all I had for episode number 8. The next podcast, I'll be discussing the HUD noise criteria. Thank you for listening to Sound, Noise, Acoustics Engineering Podcast. I provide you with knowledge and resources to address acoustical issues. My name is Bill Holliday, and this is sponsored by Sound Solutions Acoustical Consulting, independent acoustical consultants at ssacoustical.com. As always, I appreciate your feedback. You can email me, bill@ssacoustical.com, or you can get me on Facebook or Twitter, our website. You can make comments on the posts. That would be fine. And my phone number, 520-979-2213. Thanks a lot.